Hello writers, come write with me. My name is Michaela Greenwood. I create worlds for mind adventures. Welcome to my channel, Write with Michaela. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so you can go on this journey with me. Today is Friday, which is story time, or the day of our chapter exchange. If you're writing with me and you wish to exchange chapters, then send your chapter with written permission to writewithmichaela@gmail.com. I will post the email address at the end of the video. I'm looking forward to reading your chapters. Excuse me. All chapters read on Fridays, whether they are mine or another writer's work, are copyright protected material, and no one may use any part in writing their own stories. This story is PG-13, so if you are under 13 years of age, you need parental guidance. The story is in its rough draft stage, just as the last two stories we heard. The title of this story is Elloni's Pride, and today we are reading chapter 14 out of book 1. If you would like to read along, then send to the email I stated earlier and request a PDF of the chapter. Make sure you are specific. Now, let's start. Elloni's Pride, Book 1, Breaking Point. This is Chapter 14, Hidden Linkers. Libya was still receiving instructions from the tailors as they fluttered around her, but as she stepped out of the trees and the sun hit her face, she stopped and looked around. The magic within her pushed all thoughts out and no longer accepted them. At this point, Felicity noticed as she fluttered over and thought, who was sending her instructions? The 48 tailors that had gone to King Damontade's kingdom all raised their hands, and they looked around and saw how they all raised their hands. They slowly lowered their hands as they thought, I thought it was my turn. Felicity shook her head to herself. Elloni stepped forward and thought, it is okay, because the magic that entered her earlier is instructing the information into different regions of her mind. It is quite interesting to watch, thought Baldian. Felicity observed the magic and thought, but she isn't accepting any more information right now. No more lessons for an hour. And then we need to come up with a system of taking turns. She looked at the dragons, and then just Baldian. I know. You will think with Baldian and see if someone else is thinking with Libya. If she says yes, then she will give you a number. Baldian, can you add yet? I don't know what that word means, thought Baldian. Well, it's a way to count, but it is easier than counting one by one. Felicity instructed the 48 tailors to form groups of 3. And as she did, she glanced at Libya, who was walking slowly to the center of the meadow, where there was a small grouping of trees. Once the tailors were in threes, she turned back to Baldian and demonstrated counting by threes. But then she remembered the adding part and showed Baldian how to add the groups, and had 2 groups join together and then another group of 3 join. After Baldian got the hang of adding, Felicity instructed the tailors that if Baldian thought to them 3, that meant 30 minutes, and 6 would mean 60 minutes. They understood, and then fluttered to catch up to Libya and the rest of the tailors. As the dragons walked, more information opened up for them, so they knew their numbers into the thousands, and they knew an hour was 60 minutes, and they knew about cogs used in watches that the tailors and some witches had, but humans did not have yet. They knew counting by 2s and 3s and 4s. Elloni thought to Baldian, remember, Felicity told them to take a break of an hour, so when the first one tries to get a time, start with 9 and not 6. Baldian was about to ask why 9, because they could start after an hour. But just before she thought her question, the first tailor was asking her if anyone was thinking with Libya. Baldian sighed to herself and thought, yes, so your number is 9. She received, there are 2 people ahead of me? Baldian thought, yes, so make sure to wait. Baldian saw the tailor pull something out of his pocket, look at it, and then put it back. So Baldian knew it was a pocket watch and knew that there were cogs inside. She didn't know yet how the cogs kept turning, but she started receiving that information, and then in a few minutes, after the information had finished entering her, she felt another tailor asking to think instructions to Libya. Baldian glanced over to Elloni and Cremenia and knew that both knew the tailors were already anxious to begin teaching Libya again. Libya looked around in amazement at the meadow with the little flowers sprinkled around like a multicolored blanket. She bent down and picked a blue one and brought it to her nose. Libya stopped walking and closed her eyes. She felt the wind gently blowing in her hair, and she felt at peace here. There was no worry here that the soldiers would come down in the cellar and find her. There were no barks from the dogs and no roars from the dragons. Just wind and sweet-smelling flowers and beauty. As Libya relaxed, she wanted this peace for everyone. She felt that this was how life was supposed to be. Elloni saw Libya relax and connect with nature, and then she saw some more magic enter the child. But she also saw something else. And at first she wasn't sure what it was, but it was the child's determination to bring this connection, this peace, to everyone she knew. And that determination infused itself into Elloni. As Libya stood there smelling the little flower, the wind organized itself into swirling around the meadow, going from the north to the east, to the south, to the west, and around again. Little white creatures as small as a fly, but with wings almost like butterflies, raised up into the air off all the flowers, and they started flying in the wind. That's when Libya opened her eyes and saw the creatures. Before she realized they were creatures, she thought of swirling snow. The scene before her was so beautiful that there were no words to describe the delicate white swirling above a bed of beautiful colors. Libya still held the blue flower in her left hand, so she held out her right hand to catch some snow, and she could suddenly see a connection between all the things. Oh, sorry. I skipped a sentence. She held out her right hand to catch some snow. When a creature landed, she realized that it was not snow. And she could suddenly see a connection between all the things, between the creatures, the tailors, the grass, the trees in the distance, and herself. She didn't know that the golden haze she saw was a magical connection. She didn't know that she was seeing the connections that the universe provided. But she stood there. But as she stood there, many lessons that she had received from the tailors opened up, and she knew charms, and she knew fighting stances, and she knew the practice that she needed to do to become the strong warrior that she needed to be to release her people. Momentarily, she was sad because she once again realized that she was too late to save her paw. But she knew her paw would want her to continue. Then pictures started forming in the white swirling, and she saw her sister flying on a dragon. She smiled as she watched, but then she became frightened when she saw her sister falling. Then the picture suddenly stopped, and Libya looked around until she saw Felicity. I have to get to my sister. She can't ride that dragon. I don't want her to fall. She will die. Felicity fluttered forward. I saw the vision you projected onto the satin moths, but there was no time displayed. Do you know where your sister is? Can you feel her? Libya went into herself and looked for a place. I lost my spot. Sorry. Libya went into herself and looked for a place, and she didn't know where her sister was, nor did she know a time. She looked back at Felicity and slowly shook her head no. Well, we will head closer to the trees, and you continue to connect to nature. Once you learn a place or a time, then you and Elloni can head to your sister. Felicity looked at Baldian and Cremenia and thought, in the vision, it seemed that your sister was on a dragon their size and not Elloni's size, so I'm assuming the time will be soon. Libya nodded and then continued towards the group of trees. As she did, more magic entered her. Elloni looked at Baldian and Cremenia and knew that she hadn't made a mistake. Libya had just received more magic. Elloni felt that this was actually an optimal time for Libya to receive the magic because no tailors were teaching her, and her connection to nature in this meadow was very strong. Elloni just watched the magic swirl, and after a few more minutes, more magic went into Libya. The pictures once again swirled around in the flying moths until they formed more defined and less fuzzy pictures. All the tailors stopped fluttering towards the trees in the center and turned to face Libya and the pictures. Several realized that there were details in the pictures, so they automatically divided themselves into groups and watched different things. They would be ready to report to Felicity this time. This time, when Lydia fell from her dragon, Libya reached out her hand to her sister as if to catch her. And then the picture stopped before Lydia even got close to the ground. Libya looked around at all the moths and the tailors. But before she could think anything to them, a group of tailors fluttered forward to Felicity. They thought, the time is tomorrow because we saw one moon and one sun. Then another group fluttered forward and reported, and then another. After the groups gave their reports, Libya exclaimed, you saw all that? Then she said, oh, sorry for talking. Felicity fluttered forward. Don't be sorry, dear. We are trying to train you. In your life so far, you talked out loud. And once you restore peace, you can talk out loud to all your people. But right now we are hiding, and we need practices that help us remain hidden when our enemy is near. Libya nodded her understanding, and then once again headed to the trees. Baldian thought to everyone, if I gave you a time, please add 12 to that number. Felicity turned towards Baldian and fluttered closer. You've given out numbers already? I said 1 hour. Baldian glanced around, and then she thought just to Felicity. Elloni thought to me to just give numbers starting with 9, so I did. And when asked if someone was currently taking a turn, I thought yes. The last number I gave out was 153. Felicity realized that the tailors had a great anxiousness, and she was glad that she had asked them to think with Baldian first. She knew part of their anxiousness was picking up their homes and moving off the plains. But also, prophecy was hard to believe or imagine until part of it started coming true. As she thought through the prophecy herself, she realized there was a lot to do. But she knew that they would need 10 years to prepare, not 10 days or 10 months. She decided that she would need to monitor the teaching of Libya a little more closely from now on, or at least until the anxiousness died down. As Libya walked, once again her symbol shone with a bright light, and the moths swarmed nearer the light since the circular wind had died down to a gentle breeze. The tailors knew that another dragon was born, and several of them would be going to retrieve the dragon soon, if the dragon was a girl. Hushman's group had stopped for a little while when they found some wild lettuce, and then they had started walking again. They had decided to bring the bark with them, and the bark wasn't heavy, even with the stack of 3 pieces. So sometimes just one of them carried it. But now it was between Hushman and Kosher. Suddenly, Kosher's arm lit up, and he jumped back. He dropped his end of the bark and lifted his arm. He undid his button and pushed up his sleeve. The rest of the group just glanced around. Then a bright light shot forth from Kala's sleeve. Kala glanced between her arm and her brother's. Then she undid the ribbon and pushed her sleeve up. She looked around at the adults and said, I'm a linker too? Sylvie sat down Lithia and came closer to look at her daughter's arm. Once the light died down, she rubbed her hand across the black mark that was there, and then she looked at Kosher, who held his arm out. Sylvie looked at Hoshman. Thank you. Thank you for getting me out of the village. Yes, it seems that hope resided in your home, replied Hoshman. Your home too, stated Kempton. Didn't your son give us the words we needed? Hoshman nodded. Yes, and Bradley helped the 2 Linker boys when they left. He motioned to his wife and reminisced by telling them about Bradley wanting a second set of new clothes around a year ago, and shortly after Bradley had received new clothes. Then he concluded and said, Bradley is a good boy, and he didn't ask for much, so we provided since we were able. Then the last day in the village, I saw he had a bundle with the new clothes, and he brought them to the older Linker boy. He met him that day around dawn, and then he returned. No one questioned it in the village because they only saw him return. I saw him leave. So you were right. Bradley is part of this too. Then he amended his words. We are all part of this. We are the hope we were looking for in the hidden Linkers. We sent magic to Brosser, and now you sent to Lydia and Libya, and we sent to Bradley. We are all part of this new hope. Yes, we're all part of it, stated Thilda. We have cast charms among ourselves, and as you said, we sent magic. Now these 2 will need to find their dragons, so they must leave us soon. But we have our connections to them, and we will keep our connections, so we can send them magic if we need to. How do we do that? Asked Kala. Then she looked at her mother and then back to Thilda. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, ma'am. She looked back at her mother. Livia was supposed to have a dragon, not me. I don't know how to find a dragon. Libya was the one the soldiers knew about, stated Hoshman. Or the soldiers were looking for. But for the longest time, I didn't believe the prophecy. I thought, Linkers get their symbol when their dragons are born. Why would they get the symbol so early for the king or his soldiers to see? But I guess if King Damante thought it could be any child, then he would have killed all the children or had his soldiers do it. Sylvie gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my gosh, you are right. So these were hidden in plain sight. She motioned to her 2 oldest children. It makes you wonder if Lydia left because her symbol shone through. I didn't see a symbol on her like I see on them right now, stated Hoshman. What I saw was determination. Lydia was determined to find her sister. Thilda looked at Kala and said, in the past there were people who knew the Linkers without the symbols, and they brought them to their dragons to watch the birth. Others, without a person helping them, would have a very strong pull to travel in the direction of their dragon, to be united with him or her. So don't worry about finding your dragon. And you are both certainly welcome to be with us until you feel the pull of your dragon. Actually, we appreciate the company. Bradley knew the Linkers, stated Kosher as he glanced at Hoshman. But we call him a hunter. We said we didn't know another term. So this sounds like a bringer or a uniter, if there are such terms. I guess uniter would be only if they'd been together before. Kosher paused. I don't care what term they used. I'm going to call Bradley a bringer and not a hunter. Everyone glanced around as they nodded their agreement, and then Sylvie lifted Lithia up once again, and Kosher picked up his end of the bark, which thankfully was still mostly intact, and the group continued walking. Brosser, the soldiers, and the kingdom people had entered the woods. Even Dronsnide foot between the trees, and everyone was off the plains. They had a little conversation, but that died down once they were in the woods. Browser knew it might take several extra seconds to realize an enemy was near. He didn't know if that was the reason for the extra silence, or if it was just thinking through the last couple of hours. but he didn't mind the quiet, and sometimes he actually preferred it. Then suddenly the symbol on his arm shone beneath his long sleeve and the armor he wore. Browser felt it more than saw it, and he glanced around to see who else noticed, but no one seemed aware of it. He thought to John Snide, is that 6 or 7 now? Just as John Snide was thinking 6, the symbol once again lit up. Russell looked around again. Then this one is 7. Are you related to all of these? I can't be, thought John Snide. I didn't fertilize that many eggs. At least I don't think I did. Browser glanced around and then ran to catch up with Commander Quilly. Hey, tell me something, started Browser. Do you know anything about the prophecy of this time? Do you know anything about Mersic saying words and the kingdom's soldiers and people repeating them? Is that why you were so willing to try? Do you know anything about the dragons that are supposed to hatch and the new linkers? Commander Quilly glanced around. Actually, Cervic Stygmus. He motioned to a man to come over. Browser, this is Cervic Stygmus. Cervic Stygmus, this is Browser. He would be the one to ask. He studies the prophecy and the old language. Sometimes there are different interpretations, so talk to him. Did you hear my questions? Browser asked. Cervic nodded. Yes, so the first question is, yes, I know something about the prophecy of this time. Second question is, yes, we've recited several words from the old language, the old tongue or language. Not necessarily the words or word order that Mersic used today, but the sounds of the words were familiar. Take, for example, the word oyosti, or sight. It comes from oyo, or I, and then the ending sta means the ability to. So oyosti is the ability to eye something, or basically to see it. And I believe the phrase was along the lines of protect me from sight, which I'm sure the universe interpreted this time to be protect from the sight of others or the ability of others to see me, and not protect me from seeing such an unpleasant something or other. Wait a minute, said Browser as he stopped walking. Oh, geez, I knew I hated this subject. Okay, so what you're saying is that I could say the same exact words and get a different result. Like, I could go blind and not see anything. Commander Quilly looked over and watched Browser and Cervic, and watched several others stop around them. Precision and intention are very important when speaking the old language, replied Cervic. And I was much relieved that we had studied some of the basic words and concepts. I'm not sure what Mersic expected when he said the words, but the rest of us knew what to expect because of him, and thus our intention was set up. Think in our current tongue for a minute. There's quite and quiet, where if you go back to a time of writing and spelling, the two words had all the same letters, but the two words flopped the two letters at the end. There are similar words in the old tongue, like curso and kuros. There used to be a saying that started out, shashi, kuros, shashin, ya, curso. I don't remember the rest of that, and I think the words we said today didn't necessarily have a word close to them with a switched letter or two, so we were fortunate there. Browser was paying close attention, and he made a mental note to share the information with Bradley. The words shashin, kuros, shashin, ya, curso started flowing through his mind, and he knew he had heard them before, and there was more to the saying. If he could remember the meanings, he might have some clue. He did remember shashi and shashin were different ways to say the same verb, like be, am, are, is were the same. He shook his head to himself. Sometimes learning was just too much. Cervic had paused because he had seen that Browser was thinking. Then he stated, now the last question I remember was about the dragons and the new linkers. And the dragons this time shall all be able to link with each other and not just family. And the new linkers, once found, will have to train for 10 years or so because they are very young. Browser looked with wide eyes. He couldn't imagine training new linkers for 10 years, especially with no kingdom to train in or equipment to train with. The people can't last that long. We have to gather together and attack King Damantade. We need to be able to live in the kingdom. And Servant paused and looked down to the ground. He slowly shook his head. "Come on, let's keep walking," stated Commander Keeley. "We don't want to try to find our hiding place in the dark." The group started walking again. Lydia and Soflin headed west in the trees. Lydia had tried to connect with nature and see what path they needed, but she was confused as it seemed that they were in the woods and then back on the meadow. Soflin assured her that they would understand her vision in time. They didn't slide in the woods because they didn't want to bump into any trees. As they walked in the woods, Lydia could feel her excitement build. She had a dragon! Ever since she had heard about Libya being a linker and having a dragon, she too wanted one. Or in the very least, she wanted to meet Libya's dragon. Now she had one of her own and she was going to meet it. At this point, she wasn't thinking about all the stories her pa had told them during supper about Libya's fight and the struggle ahead. So she only focused on the dragon and meeting him or her. Soflin watched the magic around Lydia as they walked and knew that Lydia still kept the connection with nature going, and they wouldn't have any trouble finding Lydia's dragon, even if the dragon started wandering around again. She even saw the magic connecting Lydia to her dragon. So if Lydia started doubting herself again, she could encourage her to trust herself while quietly making sure they were heading the correct direction. Libya finally made it to the trees. She sat down with her back against the tree on the outside, and she looked back across the meadow. Soon many tailors set up their homes, and it looked like tulips were all around the woods and dotted in a few places in the meadow. If Libya didn't know better, she would have thought the red flowers were just flowers. But she knew the flowers were homes to the tailors, and that when the tailors went in their homes and lit their lamps, then the flowers would look like they were on fire. She didn't realize that the lights looked like flames because of the shape of the tailors' windows, but she would become aware of that later. Libya closed her eyes and breathed in the sweet smell of all the flowers. Then she pulled the little blue flower down that she had tucked behind her ear, and she smelled it once again. It still had a delightful smell, but the flower looked wilted. Lydia opened her eyes and looked at the limp flower. Keechin scurried out of her place and thought, "Can I have the flower?" Yes, of course, thought Libya. So Keechin ran along Libya's clothes and body, grabbed up the flower, and scurried down to the ground. Libya watched her scamper off into the woods, but she didn't worry about where Keechin was going or what she was doing. She instead turned back to look at the meadow and breathe in its scent once again. Libya closed her eyes again, and pictures started flowing to her mind. She knew they were pictures because of all the lessons she had with the tailors, but otherwise she wouldn't have thought the darkness was anything more than darkness. Now she knew that she was traveling through the darkness, and there were large rocks on either side of her path. Some rocks were as tall as her waist, and others went up to over her head. Libya reached out to touch the rock, and she felt how coarse it felt. The tailors near her saw her hand stretched out, as did the three dragons. The tailors knew she had a deep connection. Libya felt the pockmarks over the surface of the rock. Although she didn't have the vocabulary for pockmarks, so she thought of them as holes. Also, she didn't know the term shallow or deep, so she wouldn't have described the holes as shallow. But the indentions were just deep enough for the tip of her finger to sink into, and the surface of the rock was rough. Libya just moved along until she saw a light up ahead, and she heard voices. Libya paused, and her heart pounded in her chest. At this point, she forgot that she was seeing a vision, and she wasn't actually here. She listened intently to the voices and then realized that it was an orb playing the message she had heard in Elloni's orb and in Baldian's orb. Libya eased forward to the light just as it vanished back into the orb. She barely saw the dragon and thought he was a dark gray and silver, with the colors forming long, wide stripes down his body. Libya didn't know what to do, and she didn't want to scare the little baby. Then suddenly the light appeared again, and the message started playing again. Libya heard the message call the dragon Steinston. So that was the dragon's name. And as Libya gazed inside the small chamber, she realized the dark gray seemed to be more of a blue. Libya listened to the message, and it sounded familiar with a different name. But then the message added, "Your linker will not know to look for you until after you've hatched, because Johnston, the last known uniter, or last known to us, told Bellastar to cast charms on several more linkers that he discovered, so they wouldn't be known or discovered." Johnston checked after Bellastar cast the charm, and he could no longer discern the linkers, so no other uniter could or would either. This information is not in the prophecies, so hopefully that kept your linkers safe. But that means you will have to find him or her. Then the message went out again. The dragon leaned down and pushed the button again and watched again. This time Libya eased forward into the chamber with the baby dragon, and once she reached him, she gently stroked him. Steinston looked at her, but that was when she realized she was in a vision. She didn't know if Steinston would hear her or not, but she said to him, "I will send the tailors. We will be united soon." Then Libya felt the connection she had with nature pull her away, out of the dark tunnel and out of the mountain, all the way back to the meadow. When Libya opened her eyes, she had an audience of tailors and her dragons, who formed a semicircle around her. They were ready for news. Libya told them everything, starting at the end with the trip in reverse in order to get to the dragon instead of returning. Then she told about the message and the beautiful baby dragon she had seen. Once she finished, Felicity fluttered into the center and thought, "This baby is very near King Damantide. We will have to be extra careful when we retrieve him. I think the ones of us that went to watch the training there should go, and then they can return the items we borrowed as well. I also think this baby should not come here to us. I think he should go to his linker if possible." After a while, the tailors decided that the group would leave in the morning, when Libya and Elloni left to find Libya's sister and stop her from riding her dragon too soon. Thus they would use the rest of the day to practice making Elloni invisible while she flew, and to finish teaching Libya about all the things they had borrowed. And any physical training would just have to wait. Okay, writers, that is the end of chapter 14. Leave a comment below how you would feel if you were Kosher or Kala and suddenly your arm burst forth with light. They have heard stories all their lives of what that meant, but they always thought they were protecting Libya. Leave a comment on how you would feel if you were Browser, when Servik was telling him the different possible results from saying the same exact words. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would ever want to say a spell that took away my sight or prevented me from seeing something, no matter how awful it was. Also, earlier in the story, Browser was trying to say the word for lock, and he had flipped the letters a couple of times to say that word. I don't know if I need to connect that piece or not. I think I might, so I might have to edit that a little bit. And join me Tuesday for some jargon or writing prompt or both. Join me Friday for chapter 15 of Elloni's Pride, book 1, Breaking Point. Visit my website, bymckella.com, and read some character bios. If you read some, then leave a comment on which ones you've read. And I hope to start adding more bios to the website soon as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so we can continue to write together. And other people will have a higher chance of finding this video and this channel. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your participation. If you know someone who would like this video, then please share it with them. This is Michaela with Write with Michaela. Bye for now.